So what's that old saying? Third time's the charm? It's something like that, right? This is the last Game Boy Advance Castlevania game, and oh man, did they finally get that portable feeling symphony that they were looking for. Harmony has its flaws, and Circle was the first one to break onto the scene. Plus, it was made by an entirely different dev team in Konami. More on that game in another video though. But Aria? This one. This one is the best one on this system, hands down. Aria of Sorrow, the final game in the GBA trilogy. And man, what a note to go out on. Setting up a new and interesting character, new implications for how the series could keep moving forward, they took everything Castlevania, put it on its head, and somehow managed to keep the feel. It's a pretty impressive feat for sure. Now, I will say it takes somewhat heavily from Symphony of the Night. Lots of weapons, lots of abilities to use, but it streamlined some of the features and yet somehow didn't really do enough in that regard. The game itself is still pretty clunky. Soma's first adventure has some really high highs. And there really isn't anything that I would say is too low in terms of how low something can be. But that said, there are some improvements that could be made. But that's jumping ahead maybe just a bit too much. We barely started here and there is a decent amount to cover. What might surprise you though, is that I have very little experience with these Game Boy Advance titles. Yeah, I know, for being such a huge fan of these games as I am now, when I was a kid, I really only played a few of them here and there, and I all but missed out on the GBA set of games. I played this one, but I never really got super into it back then, mostly because I didn't own my own copy. I was playing it on loan from a buddy way back when. This will be my first real proper playthrough of this game, from start to finish. Now you might be asking, why didn't you play this back on release? Well, I don't know if you know this, but 2003 had a ton of great games come out. Not to mention, I was still playing catch-up at this point. Wind Waker, Metal Gear, Fire Emblem, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, Star Wars, KOTOR, Silent Hill 3, Beyond Good and Evil. 2003 was, well, it was pretty stacked. There are so many more games that came out this year alone. Why didn't I play Aria back then? Because Xenosaga had come out, and Cosmos could dual-wield Gatling guns. 2003 was wild, man. It's been 2 decades since this game came out. Its direct sequel left some things to be desired, but let's see how it all started. Soma Cruz in the year 2035, the future! Everything could be new and interesting. Where could the game series go from this point forward? At the time of this game's release? Oh man, the sky was the limit. Literally. This game takes place in a castle trapped inside an eclipse. So, join me as I approach laying out my thoughts on the best Castlevania game you can play on the Game Boy Advance. My name is Leon, and this is the Aria of Sorrow retrospective.
From this day on, the Belmont clan will hunt the Knight!
I'm not going to go too deep into the main gameplay mechanics here. I already went super hard on it when I talked about this game's direct sequel. So instead, I'll give a light refresh and some comments on some interesting things that I noticed. Plus, a few notes on weapon and item progression stuff. You'll see. You'll see. It'll make sense. Trust me. At this point, we all, more or less, know how Soma works in terms of his abilities. He absorbs the souls of the creatures that he faces. These come in 4 flavors. Bullet, which are your major hunter-style skills. You'll typically fire off something like bones or fireballs, you know? Obviously, there are more than these 2 examples, but come on now. I'd be here forever listing them all if I tried. Next, you have Guardian Souls, which offer a variety of toggleable bonuses. Either summon a familiar, float softly to the ground, or run super fast. Plus, a whole bunch more. The giant bat being a fun one, and man, I knew they nerfed the speed on this thing in Dawn, but whoo-hoo, hot damn could you schmoove in this game as a bat. That's crazy. Lastly, we have Enchantment Souls, which either give a stat bump or allow you to literally walk on water. I'm going to take a minute real quick and talk about these Enchantment Souls. I like the idea of them. They were a fun part of Dawn, and for the most part, they can really boost and alter certain playstyles. Here in Aria, they are still good, but boy, did I feel whelmed by them. Not overwhelmed. There was nothing here that was mind-blowing. Not really, anyway, at least not in a good way. But I wasn't underwhelmed by these things either. They did exactly what they said they would do, which, on the surface, is a good thing. You read the label, the thing does what it says, that's good. So what's my problem then? It's this, simply this. A large portion of these souls boost stats. I still don't see the problem, you say. The problem is that these souls boost by 4, but then there are other souls that boost by 8. And sometimes there's yet another soul that can boost by 16, which then renders the 8 and 4 boosts pointless. Moreover, by the nature of how you acquire these souls, letting RNGesus take the wheel, you can either not get these souls at all, or get them way out of order. So let's say you get that plus 16 to strength. Cool, but then you need to backtrack to some area for something, and you get a new enchantment soul. So, alright, let's check that out. But it's strength plus 4. Why? I already have plus 16. I don't need this one at all. Oh look, another! Plus 8? Yeah, these souls serve next to no point other than just being kind of like stopgaps. And if you're lucky to get them in the correct ascending order, as the game increases in its difficulty, then great. However, that's likely not going to be the case. Which is what leaves me just kind of whelmed, you know? Just the biggest meh I could give. Dawn addressed this, although not in a really great way, by letting you grind out that one soul to power it up. So, I mean, that's a bonus. That's a bonus point for Dawn, I guess. On the flip side, though, all these souls here in Aria are at max power right off the rip. So that helps cut down on the grind, but I don't know. It didn't feel great to get a soul drop only to find out that it was a worse version of something that I might have been actively using at the time. At least the luck stat works here, so I mean, you know, that's good. On another note, man, this game suffers from not having a hot swap skill like you have in Dawn, or even in Order of Ecclesia. There's no doppelganger soul here. You want to swap souls, you gotta sort this menu out every time. This becomes a huge pain point when you get to the point in the game where you have to navigate water. Hell, even maybe before that. The castle pathing is odd in a few spots, and you need to equip the Skulla soul to traverse about half a screen worth of water that requires you to sink to the bottom. It's super messy, and it's really the most painful part of this first draft on the tactical soul system. Alright, anyway, let's move on. Lastly, we have ability souls. Nothing fancy here, just another name for the relics that have existed in these games, well, since Symphony. Double jump, high jump, you get it. These help you move around the map and improve the feeling of just playing the game. I will say it's odd that the sink in the water soul isn't, you know, an ability. It has no business being an enchantment, but Also, Soma can't, like, backdash at all. He'll need an ability soul to do just that. Juiced gets to dash forward and back. Hell, every other Castlevania Pro tag, once the Egavanias became the norm, could backdash, or even backflip right out of the gate. Well, I mean, except for Nathan, that guy has some movement problems of his own. That's a tale for another day. Equipment is easy to get and use. There's no soul synth here, just find your weapons and armor in the castle or as drops. It's nice and easy, and as an added unintentional bonus, you don't even lose out on getting the Chaos Ring. Now, getting all the souls isn't easy, but at least you have them, and you won't lose out on getting the prize because you opted to use a boss soul on a weapon upgrade. Yes, I'm still very upset about that, thank you. Stupid Falman way. The pistol or gun weapon makes its debut here. Well, as an actual weapon and not like a power of any kind. It fires quickly, but it's definitely not as strong as it was in Dawn, or at least it doesn't feel that way. You can get an upgraded silver gun, but to get that you'll need to play on hard mode. In fact, there's actually a few additional upgrades that can be found in hard mode. So if that's something that interests you, I'd say go ahead and give it a shot. Lastly, Hammer and his shop are here, and unlike in Dawn, this guy here is pretty locked in. He has some dialogue for you after certain events happen in game, sure, but he's less like a stalker and more just a guy kinda in over his head. He sells some decent gear and has a few maps for you to fill out the map screen pretty early on. Ultimately though, you're gonna want that Soul Eater ring. Helps out a ton when trying to fill out the soul list and, get that Chaos Ring. Anyway, that's just some of the odd things I noticed while making my way through this version of the tactical soul system and, whatnot. They improved quite a lot over the course of these 3 games, and this style would more or less be a building block for the DS trilogy of games. Hey there, how's it going? Look, we're about to hit my journey through the story of this game and, just my take on the story as it's presented. So, before getting into all that, let's take a moment to catch up and do a bit of that old YouTube house cleaning. A bunch of you have popped up somewhat recently, and I want to take a bit of time to welcome you here. I've been using these Castlevania games as a way to take breaks from the Zelda titles. If I didn't do that, I think I'd probably go crazy. So if you're new, and new because you found my Zelda stuff, hey, hi, hello. Castlevania is another one of my longtime favorite series, and while the impact isn't as profound, I still think these games are fun and scratch a certain itch, Anyway, if you wouldn't mind doing all that traditional YouTube type stuff, I would appreciate it. Like, subscribe if you haven't, and, leave some of your own thoughts down below. Alright, let's see what Soma's first outing into Castlevania has in store for us, yeah? In what feels like tradition at this point, the game opens up with a text crawl, only this time it's written as if you are Soma as he climbs a staircase that feels maybe just a bit longer than it should. A solar eclipse is getting ready to happen, and Soma is meeting with a friend of his, Mina. Soma is in Japan as a high school exchange student, which, man, what high school is this kid going to? Mine barely could keep those ceiling tiles in place, and Soma's going on exchange student trips? That's wild. I know this is pretty much just a USA thing only, part of the whole localization. Weird choice to make, but whatever. Like, in the Japanese version, Soma's just he's a Japanese kid. I don't know why they changed it for the US market, but they did. Anyway, his description of events is somehow both correct and not correct at all. The first solar eclipse of the 21st century happened back in 2001, but to be fair, there is another solar eclipse that's supposed to fly over Japan in 2035, and it will leave the entire country covered in shadow. So, I'll let that slide. You're gonna get points for the rule of cool. Soma's intro monologue is rather poetic as he reaches the top and steps through the Torii Gate. He crosses the threshold and collapses, but as the camera pans upward, we see a ghostly vision of a rather familiar-looking castle. Alright, so right off the rip, minus the exchange student thing, this game does a great job of laying out that initial intrigue. Having the castle be set in an eclipse is such a wild and cool idea. More of that rule of cool being added here. Immediately, I'm wondering how this all happened. Why is Dracula's castle trapped in an eclipse? Why did Soma's inner monologue talk about a sleeping soul looking for a missing half? What happened? Also, why Japan? For nearly all of the series, with very few exceptions, most of everything took place in and around Europe. This is a crazy departure from everything up to this point. Eventually, Soma comes to and finds that he has been transported into Dracula's castle. Genya Arakato explains what happened, and Soma rightfully doesn't exactly believe him. They get jumped. Somehow, I really have no idea where all these guys came from. Arakato takes out most of them, leaving one for Soma. He flatlines it, and a little red orb flies out and goes right into Soma. Now he can conjure spears to toss. Confused, he asks Arakato, and in turn, Arakato tells him to head to the throne room. Soma doesn't exactly get much more of an explanation other than that, but it's clear that Arakato knows more than he's letting on. The game officially starts here. Entering the main corridor, we can see that time hasn't exactly been very kind to Dracula's castle. Walls are crumbling, curtains are ripped and torn. There's so much that's decaying away from this place, and it's all on display here. That's not even mentioning the actual zombies in this area. Some spots in this opening bit are incredibly reminiscent of Symphony, which is a nice touch. Actually, if you notice in the save rooms, you can see the coffin Alucard would use to save destroyed in the background. Very cool. Very nice attention to detail. Speaking of cool, outside of normal zombie monsters, you're going to find these zombie soldiers. What's cool about that? The fact that these zombie soldiers are wearing somewhat modern fatigues, which not only clashes with all the knights and other, mythological-esque creatures that are wearing much older attire, but clues you in, if you are clever enough to notice a small, seemingly nothing detail like that, that something must have happened in recent-ish times. They even toss grenades. Wild. It won't be long until you face the first boss and gain a guardian soul that will more or less stay on as an equipped item for a long time. The flying armor slows down your descent after you jump, which helps in clearing some of the longer jumps found early in this castle. So this is good. It allows for more exploration. Speaking of, going a little deeper into this area, you will eventually stumble across a guy named Graham Jones. Graham here is, he says he's a missionary. Graham asks Soma how he got into this place, and Soma gives a, not really sure kind of answer. Graham just kind of rolls with that. Soma then asks if this is in fact Dracula's castle, and Graham gives a little bit of a history lesson, which weirdly includes a Nostradamus prediction. Okay, so look, we're going to go on a bit of a side tangent here. For those of you that don't know or have decided to move on past this, which, I don't blame you. I forgot just how much of a weird cultural impact this guy had for some reason. Nostradamus was a guy who lived in the 16th century who, for whatever reason, gained a bit of notoriety for, and I'm going to use this term lightly, his predictions. What kind of predictions? Well, it's kind of hard to say. Many of the things that he claimed he saw and took note of were laid out in such a way that they could be interpreted just about any way that you would want. Have you ever seen one of those psychic TV shows where they ask incredibly vague questions and they kind of wait for somebody to take a bite?
They have an argument in public or a joke about passing gas.
Do you have a pet? Do you have a sweet tooth? Do you believe in the power of a curse?
Have you had your hearing tested lately?
Planning a trip soon? Can you remember the tallest man you've ever seen?
Do you love to go a-wandering beneath a clear blue sky?
It never happened.
Look, I know that I snuck in there very clearly some beyond belief factor fiction, but you get the idea, right? It's that same kind of vibe. I think there were a few of these on sci-fi or something back in the day. Anyway, the point is these predictions are kind of vague. Some line up with some stuff that happened in history, but if you make something just vague enough, and if you have a decent understanding about how world events happen, you yourself could make a Nostradamus-esque prediction, and you might have roughly the same success rate.
Uh-oh, Simpsons did it! Simpsons did it!
No!
Don't have a cow, man!
Oh, sweet Jesus!
Now, all of that to say, for some reason, A lot of people put a ton of stock into these Nostradamus predictions. How much? Well, enough that Iga and his crew felt that it would fit in kinda nicely with the lore of Castlevania. Now, there was a Nostradamus prediction for the year 1999, and it went like this. Quote, "The year 1999, 7th month, will come from the sky a great king of terror. Resurrect the great king of Anglemoy before, after. Mars will reign by good luck." Now, some of that doesn't exactly apply here in terms of Castlevania lore, but we'll circle back on this. This prediction, in the real world, amounted to basically nothing. I did do a bit of digging, but unfortunately, this prediction turned out just a mess of conspiracy theories and honestly not much else. So it was a bunch of essentially nothing. In Castlevania, however, well, let's just say in a game where vampires and other mythological things exist, this prediction probably holds a bit more water. Also, it ties in with some other things that went down in the year 1999. It's gonna blow your mind. But more on that real soon. Okay, mini history lesson over, I guess. Well, for now, for now anyway. Let's move on, just a little. So, Graham states that Dracula was brought back per this prediction. However, his reign of terror was fairly short-lived as a group of vampire hunters were able to destroy him completely. They were able to break his resurrection cycle by sealing this castle in a solar eclipse, which I found out in 1999, a solar eclipse that stretched across most of Europe, and guess where the line of totality passed through? Yep, it hit its height in Romania, which is the country of origin for Wallachia, in which Vlad Tepes, aka Dracula, once lived. I lied. That history lesson is still ongoing. I hope you kept that pen and paper nearby. There's gonna be a quiz after. Now, at the time that this game was being made, all of that information was still somewhat recent, right? 1999 to 2003 isn't really that long of a time period, so it would make sense that they would use this as a way to continue the story. But man, what a ride. They used two real-world things in history, Nostradamus and a solar eclipse that just so happened to cross right over Romania to justify not only how Dracula was able to come back, but also as a way to close off the millennia-long story that was in play. And then, to further add to the whole thing, they use this information and solar eclipse prediction models to find that a solar eclipse will cast most of, if not all of Japan in darkness in 2035. This is so wild. Someone had a plan and they went all in on it. This is what makes this game so good, man. At least in my opinion. You think it's the gameplay? The tactical soul system? No. It's this level of care and attention to detail. They wanted this game to take off. Castlevania was going to go for a ride the likes of which had not been seen by mere mortal men. God, I bet the people who played this at release were going crazy with ideas on where the series could go after this, and then to have all of that wonder and excitement dashed upon the rocks when Dawn of Sorrow fumbled so hard. Not to rag on that story, man. The build-up in this game is so well executed, and then, God, here comes Celia and her lackluster lackeys. Man, whatever. Yeah, okay, Graham spills the beans on just about everything, and that apparently someone new is to take over as Dracula. He bids himself farewell, and it's back to exploring. Nothing really happens as you explore the parts of the castle that are open to you. The chapel has a mana core boss, which goes down easy enough, and you can and will find plenty of new equipment and souls to use, and, try out. Things go pretty smoothly. I will say Soma feels not overpowered, but definitely stronger than a bunch of other protagonists do up to this point in the adventure. It's only been a handful of areas, but I feel almost unstoppable as I make my way through the castle. Entering the study, we run into a young woman. She introduces herself as Yoko Belnades, a member of the church, and she is already somewhat aware of who Soma is. She just about drops the most obvious thing ever in saying that Genya Arakato informed her about him. She also says that your powers are dark in nature, and Soma finds that to be a bit uncomfortable. She does try to clear that up, saying that dark doesn't necessarily mean evil, and to her credit, she's not wrong. She equates it to being like a weapon. It can be used for good or for ill, but it's up to the wielder. She then asks if you have run into a guy named Graham, and Soma, being the innocent little pup that he is, says, yeah, of course I did. Yoko thinks that Graham is going to be the next Dracula, and that we should probably stay away if possible. So she moves on to go do her own thing, and cool. For us, though, it's back to business as usual. Before too long, we'll find yet another boss, the Great Armor, and, well, man, nothing too great here, honestly. Fighting this is easy enough, and before you know it, it goes down. It's such a nothing enemy. Behind the door it was protecting, we find, this guy. Hammer is his name, and he tells us that he's wanting to open up a shop. He was sent on, I guess, a one-man mission to Dracula's castle. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but okay. He gets teleported in, much like everybody else, and just kind of bails on whatever his mission was, which, as far as I'm aware, isn't exactly a thing you can do. I mean, to be fair, it's a terrible mission, but it's not exactly an unlawful order, so, yeah, he deserted the mission. I mean, I doubt they're going to be keeping tabs on him in this solar eclipse dimension space we're in, so I guess, I won't tell if you don't. Anyway, he leaves, and he tells you to come by, and he's got some deals for you, if you do. We can now double jump, and with that comes even more to explore in this castle. Awesome. Can't wait to see what else is in and around here. I went back to the main entrance, though, real quick, just to check in on Mina and to see what Hammer's shop is about. Mina seems a bit, at first, put off by Hammer, but that quickly subsides. Hammer's shop is, it's a shop, so buy and sell whatever you want, I guess. But since I'm in this neck of the woods, I can finally hit up this spot right here and enter the dance hall. It's in here that we meet up with the last major player in this game, Jay. Jay doesn't remember his name, or really much of anything, but he does sense something dark within Soma. Jay explains that somehow he woke up in a hospital after being involved in the prophecy of 1999. I guess he didn't have a chart or anything to ID himself with after coming to, but I don't know, there were enough people around to call him Jay? Weird. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. He came here because his heart fills with fear when hearing the name Dracula, so confronting that fear head-on was his idea of trying to regain his memory, which I guess is kinda working out for him because he's starting to recall things. He and Soma part ways for now, and it's back to work. At this point, we have met every major player, and all that's left for us to do really is explore the castle and see what we can find. Immediately, I found a place that I can't get to because Soma can't slide, so not this way, I guess. Let's head back a bit and explore the rest of the dance hall. There isn't a lot in the dance hall, really, but it does give way to a cellar, and down here is the giant golem, and behind this giant fella is the slide ability. Great, so we can just head right on back up. This is the kind of thing that I enjoy about this type of game. It's not really all that free-form. There is a critical path, but it's those small paths and little offshoots that the game kinda teases you with. Is there really anything down those paths? Sometimes no, but maybe, in the case of this game anyway, a unique monster or some kind of equipment. Plus, it helps that the game looks and plays well. Also, you get some boss-as-hell music to listen to as you move and groove through the castle. I think I might have really liked this if I had played it back when it came out originally. Not to say that, I don't like it now, it's great. I just know back then it would have been one of my favorites. Easy. With that slide skill firmly in our possession, we can enter the inner quarters. Here we have yet another place that requires us to have some sort of item or soul to get past this Alice in Wonderland looking rabbit here. In fact, this whole area, including the dance hall, has like a dollhouse kind of feel to it. Many of these rooms have furniture in them, that are in the foreground as opposed to just in the background, which doesn't seem like much of anything, but it's odd when you can't just sit in a chair because Soma's behind it rather than, in front of it. It's nothing major, but, just an odd thing that I noticed. Speaking of, I noticed other things in this dollhouse. For example, all the monsters are female, or at least as female as demons and whatnot can be. That's some interesting theming. This area isn't all that large. Another point for, that whole dollhouse idea. The boss is also pretty interesting, the Headhunter. I know there are some interpretations of this boss coming from one of those Wizard of Oz books. I can't remember exactly which one it is. Return to Oz, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, that's cool. But to fit the theme of the dollhouse, to me, this boss is more like one of those higher-end dolls or figures that have replaceable heads and stuff. You know the kind. The soul you get from this fight is a pretty good one, but man, does it start out kinda weak. You're gonna have to grind out that power if you want it. One thing leading directly into another. Right outside of this boss room is a short climb up a tall tower, and you need what's up there. The Undyne Soul, which lets you walk on water. One of those enchantment souls that probably should have just been an ability soul. And get ready for the best/worst part that's coming. That amazing endless menuing. Real quick, as a personal note, I would have fixed this by letting the soul check if you have it, and if you do, you just kind of stand on the water. In fact, the water could have acted like a regular platform that if you wanted to be in the water, all you would have to do is press down and jump as you would with any other, platform that you can kind of phase through. Done. Easy fix. Not sure how it would work in the code of the game, but man, it would have been nice if this is how the Undyne Soul worked. Personal development note aside, let's keep moving. So for a while, I spent a bunch of time just kind of wandering around, and eventually I found this old ancient book, one in a set of 3. As a bonus, there was a new area to get to, and well, ain't that something? It's blocked from the other side. Well, bummer. Back to searching around and getting some soul drops, I guess. And I spent a good amount of time doing this. Went from level 11 to 20, and I got a decent amount of stuff, so it was kind of worth it, I think. You might be asking, but you got that Undyne Soul. Surely you could have just gone to the lower level of the map and, head that way. And, you're right. I could have just beelined it straight to that area, but look at this map. I had so much to explore and find. How could I not, Before too long, though, I made proper progress and entered the floating garden. Doing this opened up even more of the castle. Entering this area makes 7 more literal floating areas pop up above the castle proper. This is pretty neat. Each entry and exit is attached to another floating box, and this sets up for a late game area that has a fairly disjointed feel to it. But we're not there yet, so onward we must go. I made my way through these floating areas, but given how it was presented to me here, I felt it was some sort of late game place, so I didn't stick around too long. Not because I felt weak here, I just didn't want to trigger any kind of end game too early. Remember, I haven't really played this game all that much, so for all intents and purposes, it was new to me, and if you have been on this channel for a while, you know that I tend to try and complete as much of a game as possible. So I would come back to this area, just, it might be a while. Making my way out, though, I found one of those transition hallways, and well, look who we have here. Graham Jones. Soma goes and just straight up asks Graham about his intentions to inherit Dracula's powers. Graham does not deny this. In fact, he tried to correct Soma in saying that he is Dracula, just reborn. Graham here was born on the same day that Dracula was finally flatlined in 1999. Soma is confused by this because Graham has been nothing short of nice and polite. And that's when Graham drops, "I don't consider you to be a threat to my mission." Now that's just cold, man. You remember how I went in on Celia and her 2 dumbass lackeys? How they just kinda were around and really didn't do much of anything? How the boss fights with each of them was very underwhelming? How they literally cornered her more than once and did nothing? She came down from the start like a Power Ranger villain, and was an antagonist the entire way through. There was no mystery around her or her intentions, and sure, sometimes that works, right? Dracula never really had any mystery around him. Well, not after Lament of Innocence anyway. There was always some kind of force or person trying to bring Dracula back. Sometimes it was just Dracula's pure willpower that did that, but in most other games, his resurrection had already happened or was actively being worked on. You could say that Celia was working in this way as well, but that's not entirely true. In Symphony, no one knew why Richter was doing what he was doing. Shaft was around, but you only discovered him after fulfilling certain criteria. Barlow was set up to be a trustworthy person in the beginning, and it was only after you faced down Albus that you learned the truth. Death was working in Portrait of Ruin, unbeknownst to Bronner. Here we have Graham, who at first seems like just another person who got sucked up into this mess. You later find out that he might not be what we think he is, and then he himself doubles down on that and says we don't matter to him enough to even bother with on any kind of level. He, as an antagonist, is so much better than Celia was, hell, than most other antagonists. It's not a very high bar for the series, don't get me wrong. There are way better villains and antagonists out there for sure, but man, this guy was fun. This is what this game and even this series needed, and they goofed it all up in the sequel. Man, what a hard fumble. I can't figure out how they went from all this planning and story, using eclipses and like historical figures, the solar system and fate, all this stuff, using Nostradamus and whatnot. And then the follow-up, just a few years later, we get the biggest nothing burger of a Castlevania plot ever. What a bummer. The gameplay is better in Dawn of Sorrow, but like, that's kinda it. This game set up for the easiest layup of all time, and somehow, from the jaws of victory, Konami pulled out the defeat. It's almost funny. Again, no hate if you prefer Dawn. I get it, it plays well, it feels better to play overall, but oh man.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
Graham, interested in how Soma has lasted this long, flat out asks him about his power. Soma gives the appropriate answer, but Graham, well, he doesn't exactly take it well. He gets a bit unhinged, shall we say, and takes off immediately for the throne room. Soma, confused, presses on anyway. We have made it to the clock tower, and you know what this means. Medusa heads and plenty of gears. Not too deep into this new area, though, we find Yoko again. Soma gives her a quick info dump about everything that had just happened with Graham, and she explains that Graham thinks that everything in this castle is his. Yoko takes a bit of comfort in the fact that Soma is on her side, and Soma's confused and goes, "You sure about that?" And then Yoko hits back with, "Why? Don't you want to be on my side?" Ah, that playful flirting. They agree to team up and kind of promptly split ways, so not much of a team up, but they're working on the same side, so I guess that counts, right? At the top of the clock tower, as per normal, is Death, and Death has nothing to say. It's so odd. I feel like it's a missed opportunity not to have Death play a more important role in the story, even if it was a throwaway line. I don't know, man. Something along the lines of, "I needed to test you if you are to become the master of this place. You have potential more than the pretenders to the throne." Or, you know, something, anything to add to the mystery here. But, you know, hey, it's fine. Death gets underused in most of the games, so, you know, what's one more? Still, it would have been nice, right? Anyway, behind the door that Death was protecting is the Skulla Soul, which lets you walk underwater, and it's another enchantment soul, another one that probably should have just been an ability, you know, like the Undyne Soul before this. If you drop under the water, using the idea that I laid out earlier, then you could walk under the water. No menus needed, but no. Now with these two souls, we get to play Menu Simulator 2003, so, you know, let's get to that. Before heading into the depths of the castle's underground reservoir, though, I stopped in to talk with Mina, and I learned about some of the lore surrounding her. Specifically, we learn about the Hakuba Shrine. Mina talks about some local legends and mythologies involving Susanoo, god of storms, and Tensho Daijin, using this as a way to explain why eclipses happen at all and why some people pray to them. The Hakuba Shrine is a place that allows for people to do just this. Climb those stairs and, pray if you want to as an eclipse is happening. In 1999, the priestesses of the shrine were tasked with performing this ritual that they do in Europe to cast the castle into the eclipse. So, hey, some of the pieces are starting to come together, and that's pretty neat. This stuff kind of located in this underground reservoir is pretty neat. Lots of new monsters to see, including Ariel's dad. What's up there, King Triton? There's also some kind of waterfall with an armor behind it, but you can't get back there, at least not yet. Looks like you might need a couple of souls. So I guess we'll come back a bit later. As I was exploring down here, I came across the third ancient book, as well as Graham and Yoko. Wasting no time, Graham has already stabbed Yoko, and it's not looking very great for her. Graham teleports out, and Arakato just kind of struts on in. He takes over caring for her wounds, and will bring her to the front castle gate. We are once again reminded to head to the throne room, so, back to it, I guess. I got to the arena that was nearby and started to finally get some tough fights. Things were starting to do some real damage. Not a lot, mind you, but some. If you head back to check in on everybody, you'll get some dialogue from Mina about Yoko, and even Hammer starts talking about her. For better or for worse. Fighting your way to the bottom of the arena, you will find Balor, which is a pretty good fight. Guy hits like a truck and has a pretty good fake out bit. Beating Balor gets you 2 souls. One is pretty fun to use and does decent damage if you manage to land that punch. The other is the Bat Soul, so now you can fly around. Leaving this area, we see Jay. He's doubled over and seems to have gotten his memories back. He reveals that he is in fact Julius Belmont, and the one who took Dracula down for good back in 1999. When Soma suggests that Graham is Dracula, or at least is trying to become Dracula, Julius hesitates at that thought, saying he has a hunch as he leaves to go reclaim his vampire killer, which he left somewhere in the castle. With the bat form, there really isn't anywhere that you can't get to in this iteration of the castle, though I am missing some key abilities and souls still, so I set out to fill out as much of the map as possible. Currently I'm at about 75%, so the remaining 25 shouldn't really be much of an issue. While exploring, I came across this area, and it's kinda creepy. I got a bit creeped out while playing it. These strange clay men kept walking out of these tombs, and they didn't attack, nor could they really be hit. So, I followed the trail and they led me to Legion. Legion never really had a build-up like this before, so this was kind of neat. Another point in the bucket for cool stuff that this game just kind of chooses to do. But, you fight one version of Legion, you've pretty much fought them all, so this was no different. Well, alright, look, that's not 100% true. This fight has some things going for it that others don't really. You can circle around the cube here, and Legion itself fires off lasers in a somewhat new pattern, but like usual, this fight is fairly easy. Taking time to clear out the map down here was a great call because I gained the Galamoth Soul, which should negate that Time Rabbit, the one in the hall all the way back in the inner quarters. So before heading that way, I went to check in on that waterfall, and I got that Eversing armor. Not bad. Plus, I was able to open up this back door, and I found the, oh my god, I'm gonna butcher this thing, Calamin Solus? Calam Solus? I don't know. Look, I'm trying to read this, and I don't really know what the pronunciation is, and Google's definitely not gonna tell me correctly, so, yes, this big sword. So, it all worked out. Making my way to that time stop hallway, and up that tower, you get the second ancient book. Unfortunately, though, there really isn't much else to do in this area, but hey, with all 3 books, we can piece together what we need to take down Graham. With everything else more or less taken care of, all this really leaves is the climb to the throne room by way of the top floor. I don't know why they went with that name. It feels kind of like a placeholder name, but whatever, man. The top floor is home to some of the stronger monsters and demons that the game can throw at you. A solid place for level grinding, and if you're feeling it, soul grinding. Now, when you get to him, you can enter the throne room and face Graham. This conversation can go one of two ways. You enter, and Graham will accuse you of stealing the souls of his demons, which, okay, yeah, sure, your demons. Whatever. Graham will fight much like Dracula does. He teleports, uses fireballs and the like, and you know what, all in all, it's a pretty good, fun throwback fight. He even has a second form that is almost kinda reminiscent of the Dracula second form from Symphony, only it's less demonic and seemingly more, I don't know, angelic? I mean, it's still dark and rather upsetting looking, but it's different from what Dracula looked like at the end. Must be part of Graham's missionary persona or whatever. This is another fun fight, though it's rather simple in how it works. You just gotta dodge the hands and the holy beam that tracks around the room. When you land the final blow, Graham explodes into a bunch of dark souls and Arakato steps out from the other room? How did he even get in there? He'll tell Soma to use his power of dominance to open a portal back to Earth, which works. Everyone gets sent back. Well, at least Soma, Mina, and Arakato do. Arakato says that the others will show up eventually, and in a small twist of how these things can end, there's no crumbling castle and no cliff, just a torii gate and the eclipse passing in the background. Kinda cool. Now, any seasoned Castlevania player worth their salt will know that this isn't exactly right. It is an ending, but probably not the good ending. The best part, you already know what to do to get that good ending. It's what those ancient books were for. This is a great way to subtly push the player into the right direction. None of this equip the talisman stuff. You have to find the answer through exploring the game. Not only that, but it encourages you to try and solve a small puzzle in what souls to not only find, but equip. Yes, equip. You can't just have these in your back pocket. You need to actively use them to make proper progress. Way more satisfying than what you do in Dawn. By equipping the Flame Demon, Giant Bat, and Succubus souls, and then going to fight Graham, you get the true ending. The fight with Graham is pretty much the same, but you do get some different dialogue as he goes to transform into his second phase. Once Graham is defeated properly, Soma begins to absorb the power that Graham was using, and in doing so, gains a new look. Or at least he does in his portrait anyway. His game sprite kinda stays exactly the same. That portrait though, neat. Arakato is still secretly in that other room but gets forced out because, well, Soma can sense him now. He explains that Soma needs to cut off chaos from influencing him any further and that they needed this to be the outcome because if it had happened anywhere else, Arakato would not have been able to help at all. So Soma's mission is clear. Enter the Chaos Realm and put a stop to all this before the power consumes him. For your efforts, you'll get the Dracula Tunic and the Black Panther Soul, which lets you run really fast. It became my default in the Soul Kit after this. If you take a second, though, to check in on Mina, Hammer, and Yoko, you'll get some dialogue about how Soma has changed. Guess they can't really see the new red eyes. I took some time to grind out the rest of the soul list and get that Soul Eater ring, and boy, man, was that quite the grind. There's really only a small portion of the map that hasn't been filled in, and that's because of a dark barrier. So back to the floating gardens. I was kinda right in that this is an endgame area. I knew it. I had that game sense, man. Heading there now sets up a fight between Soma and Julius. His hunch from earlier? Well, that wasn't about Graham at all. He figured it was you, and had he had his memory from the start, he would have likely confronted you then and there. Julius loses this fight not because he was weak or anything, in fact, he was actually holding back, and felt that Soma wasn't completely taken over by this darkness. How does one get to the Chaos Realm, one might ask, and the answer may surprise you. You have to enter the eclipse inside of the eclipse. Double rainbows were a mystery. A double eclipse is probably mind-blowing. Anyway, doing this will send you to the chaotic realm, of which there is no map. And it's just bunches of random bits of prior stages kind of haphazardly slapped together. It's up to you to navigate this space. That said, it's not too complicated, and if you want 100% the soul list, you'll need to grind out some of the demons that are found in here. The Chaos Ring is worth it though. Before entering the final fight, you'll get some reassuring words from Mina and crew as you go to face this darkness alone. Chaos is a pretty fun final boss. Definitely different than pretty much every other Castlevania up to this point. At the start, you'll have all your souls locked away until you break the corresponding jewel things here, and once that's done, you'll face Chaos's core? I'm not really sure what this is, but there's plenty to fight and dodge in here, so that's fun. Once you end up beating Chaos, it'll break the castle inside the eclipse, and seemingly shuts off Dracula from the powers that kept bringing him back. That said, Soma still exists, so the potential is technically still there, but I can't imagine they would try to justify bringing Dracula or a proxy of Dracula back in any way. That would that would be silly. Soma drifts in some white space and eventually wakes up like he did at the start in Mina's lap. The two of them watch the final moments of the eclipse, and for now at least, they have their happy ending. The tradition continues. Much like every other Castlevania, once you beat it, there is an offshoot version for you to play. In this case, we have Julius Mode. And this mode is so cool, and it has some unique aspects that other interpretations of this mode just don't. Julius Mode here, unlike the version in Dawn, is a solo operation. Just Julius. No Alucard, no Yoko. Plus, Julius moves with some purpose in this version. This guy hauls. Not as fast as Richter in Portrait of Ruin, but man can Julius move. Also, unlike his mode in Dawn, he can jump higher and uses his Omnitas Veritas skill, or, what looks like a raging demon. Super neat, though I never really got a whole lot of use out of it. Now, this mode isn't gonna give you any additional story or anything. There's no what-if kind of thing happening here. You just kinda have the whole castle to explore. Or not. You can run from the straight and go directly to the throne room and fight Graham right off the rip. It might not be very easy, but you can do that if you decide. If you do, however, decide to take your time and explore the whole castle and fight the bosses, you can level up. Sort of. Julius's health will never go above 800, and his MP doesn't change either, so you get what you get there. But claiming the orbs that these bosses leave behind boost Julius's stats. How much? I'm not entirely sure, but it is very noticeable. You can whip a monster and get about 98 damage on it, beat the boss that's in the next room, get that orb, and whip that same monster, and now you're hitting for 112. So, eventually that adds up over the course of the game. Do you need to beat all the bosses? No, of course not. But I would recommend beating as many as you feel comfortable with to give yourself the experience that you're looking for. What really bums me out, though, is that we will probably never get a proper Julius game. I think there is room to experiment here. Besides, the last time we got to play a purely Belmont experience in this Igavania style was Harmony, and while that game isn't all that bad, it's only okay in its own right. It would be super fun to get a Symphony of the Night style Julius game, and until that happens, this might be the best version of that what-if kind of scenario that we get. Otherwise, the only other game with Julius in it is Dawn, and that's fine, but even that could stand to have some improvements done to it, And here's the end-all for me. I think this game is both the best game on the Game Boy Advance when it comes to Castlevania, and it's the best one out of the duology of Sorrow. The fact that they went from all of this and managed to dumb it way down is almost impressive, really. That's not to say that this game is perfect, it certainly has its own flaws for sure, but I would have to give the team serious props for going that hard on the lore and using real-world events and people to, justify its existence. I know a lot of planning goes into making games, especially the great games that exist out there, so it's strange to me that they went in the direction that they did for the opening act of the DS trilogy. I won't harp on Dawn that much, I already aired out most of my problems with it. But after completing this game, I don't know. I don't hate Dawn. It's a fine game in its own right. But man, they did Soma so dirty in that. I don't know how they could have kept that character going, but at least this game shows that they had some solid footwork to work with. Maybe it was just misguided as it went on. Or, I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking too hard about it. At any rate, if you haven't tried this game, I encourage you to do so. It has a bunch of fun ideas that become the groundwork for both its direct sequel and its spiritual successor. It found a balance of keeping characters intriguing and monsters a fun roll of the dice. I know I didn't really mention it here because it's not really possible anymore, but if you had 2 copies or friends with copies of this game for the Game Boy Advance, then you could trade souls with each other to help alleviate some of that soul grind. Even Iga and company back then thought doing it all yourself might have been a bit much. Honestly, I wish they kept that functionality in Dawn, not that you could do that in the Dominus collection anyway, but I mean, for the DS, it would have been a pretty cool idea. I like the hidden level up system in Julius Mode. I like that mode is even a thing at all. I like the New Game Plus lets you keep just about everything, minus some equipment and souls, for sequence breaking purposes. I like that the story was super well thought out and new. For about 25-ish years up to this point, most of the games were the same in terms of what the plot was. They clearly had a vision for this game, and they did their best to deliver on it. I can see why people were really hyped up for Dawn, and after playing Aria, I can see why a bunch of people felt underwhelmed by it, myself included, in retrospect. Story aside, they nerfed a good chunk of the souls in terms of how they work, and in the case of the bat, how fast you can move with it. Plus, they did the Valkyrie soul a huge disservice in Dawn. It hits like a truck in Aria, and you can cast it pretty rapidly. Anyway, I really recommend trying this one out. However you manage to get your hands on it, give it a try. I imagine the Advanced Collection is the easiest and possibly the most convenient. Otherwise, if you can handle sailing the high seas, maybe that's the right choice for you. And naturally, of course, a physical copy will never steer you wrong. Just watch out for those price tags. Be the master of your own fate. And, I don't know, maybe stay away from Torii gates when a solar eclipse is about to happen, Hey there, everybody. Thank you for sticking with me as I went into my first real completion of this game. If this channel is new to you and you want to see why I was ragging on Dawn of Sorrow as much as I was, check out this video over here. And if you want some of my other thoughts on the DS games, maybe try this one out, yeah? Anyway, I appreciate you hanging out here and spending some time with me. Keep it clean out there.